Right now, I want to tell you guys about my experience playing The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD. Over the weekend, I put in a lot of hours playing Skyward Sword HD on the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo shot me out a review code. They also shot me out the Loftwing and Zelda Amiibo and these amazing Skyward Sword HD Joy-Con controllers. Thank you for these incredible gifts. It is a pretty amazing way to experience this game, I gotta tell you. And I've been playing the game because I played it on the Wii 10 years ago, and I'm certainly thinking about, the echo through time of me in that same space, but waggling my Wiimotes, playing through Skyward Sword on the Wii back then, and having a great time. And it did take a little bit of, overcoming the motion controls and a lot of waggling, but I got right into that game and had such a fantastic experience. I loved it. I remember raving about it with Scott Jones. And I wanted to play Skyward Sword HD, at least my initial playthrough. I haven't tested out the motion controls at all yet, and I haven't beaten the game yet, so I guess this is kind of my first thoughts review on the experience, but I have beat it in the past, and I remember a lot of it, but not all the little minutiae. One of the cool things about this game is Nintendo has been quick to publicize is that this is kind of a prequel to the whole Zelda timeline, so it's a pretty cool way to kind of get into the myth building that is The Legend of Zelda. You start in this town in the skies called Skyloft. You quickly learn that you are going to be piloting a Loftwing, and you're a part of a big ceremony, and in the course of the ceremony, all kinds of ancient ritual sort of takes place, and you are introduced to the Master Sword and Fi, this being that exists within the Master Sword that is also a helpful ally, much more helpful this time around because she's not always in your face, always gabbing at you. And you have to rescue Zelda because she goes missing at the very beginning of the game. And you're introduced to a small collection of characters, and one thing that you kind of recognize with taking a look at a game that is 10 years old and still kind of along the path as the Zelda games matured into 3D design is that Skyloft isn't really, overrun by inhabitants. There's not lots of people. It feels a little bit empty. And in fact, when you get down into the ground-based exploration stuff in Skyward Sword HD, you do feel like it not only is it kind of linear and sort of funneling you from puzzle to puzzle, environmental puzzle to puzzle, but it's not overly loaded with different characters to take care of. You might get surrounded every once in a while, and of course you get the Master Sword circle swipe where you can knock everybody down. But it does feel a little bit empty, and it does feel a little bit hemmed in. You can feel all the, there's somewhat invisible walls, but also, geometric walls built into the level design, which was par for the course back then. Everything couldn't be open world on Wii architecture. And so there's a little bit of scaling back as you dive into this game, because what Breath of the Wild allowed us to do is look at everything across the horizon and go there and climb it and, explore it to our heart's content. And you can't really do that. You kind of have to go, when you're in each of these dungeon type situations and trying to figure out where to get to the chest and to solve the puzzles and beat the bosses. There's like little nooks and crannies in the world building that you can't see at first pass. And I'll get into the cameras in a second here. So you're kind of like trying to shift perspective on the geometry that the designers have put into the world building, and you look at every room from a different vantage point until you solve the room. And then you go, okay, I can climb that, or I can swim under this, and I can get to that. It was incredible design and development when this stuff was still kind of relatively fresh. We'd had the N64, and we'd had the GameCube, and then we were into the Wii. And it was still kind of fresh, but we've progressed so much further along, and Breath of the Wild is just such a massive leap forward for the Zelda franchise. It's hard to check that out of your memory and go back in time a little bit like this. Also, when you couple in the clunky camera controls, especially in 2021, you have to press the shoulder button on your controller, whether you're playing with a Pro Controller or you're playing with the Joy-Con on the Switch, and then you can move the right thumbstick around. And this is because you use the right thumbstick like the motion controls. It's the connection to the motion strikes and sword swipes that you can use with the Joy-Con, but that dates back to the Wii remote and the nunchuck that you would use for the sword and the shield. So very similar kind of energy in the way that you play the game, and that sword is always available to you with that right thumbstick. So you'll be running and you'll go to make a camera move, but nope, you'll pull the sword out. And so the sword is out all the time. And one of the things that I really have struggled with is being able to pick up a bomb and aim it properly using the camera controls and the target lock that you have with the left trigger, and either throw the bomb correctly or roll the bomb correctly. Now, the controls are fine, they work, it's just janky, and it's not as smooth and as intuitive as controls are now. You know, all of the refinement that has happened. And so I suspect that Nintendo is going to get a lot of real-world feedback. I don't think that this is as elegant a utilization of the controls as, you know, we've come to expect out of Nintendo. But I think that's part and parcel with the fact that this game was built around motion controls. And I think they've done a decent job with the sword strikes. The angle of you pushing the controller will determine how you're swinging at some of your enemies. You can also press the right thumbstick in and you'll do a jab, or you can go left to right and you'll do the circle swipe, and there's other moves as well. You can jump up in the air and do the kill strikes and stuff like that. It's pretty damn cool, but I almost wish that that was done by pressing down the L shoulder button, because you're not in combat all the time. I mean, that's the thing about Zelda experiences. It's a nice blend of action, but there's so much exploration, and I just feel like that camera tuning should have been the first decision, I feel, because I constantly am trying to shift over the camera to kind of reposition, and there's a follow cam that does an adequate job, but it's just not as elegant. I mean, that's what I keep coming back to. So the game feels very worthy of this remaster. It definitely was a terrific experience when I played it originally, and I'm having a blast sinking into the lore and meeting up with some of the shopkeepers and the different inhabitants of the different lands that I'm running into, and getting into the boss fights and defeating the creatures, exploring these dungeons. All of that stuff is fun. It does feel dated. It does feel not as ambitious and not as beautiful and overwhelming as Breath of the Wild. But I don't know how, apart from where they go with Breath 2 and where, you know, Nintendo takes the Zelda franchise from here on out, I don't know quite how they do that. And I also feel like that Link's Awakening, because it was so stylized for Nintendo Switch and it looked like a little toy world, was maybe a little bit more of a successful reimagining of a classic brought back. And because you're kind of removed a little bit, you don't do the full one-to-one comparison of more modern Zelda experiences, but you can't help but do that when you play Skyward Sword and think of Breath of the Wild. And I have to admit that as I was playing Skyward Sword and enjoying it, I was also thinking I would prefer to be playing Breath of the Wild right now, and I was also thinking about The Witcher 3 of all games. Thinking just how hyper-detailed and beautifully fleshed out, and everything's voiced, and how far we have come, you know, with action, role-playing, adventure-type titles. And as good as Skyward Sword is, and as worthy of re-exploration and re-examination it is, and as beautiful as Nintendo has crafted these Joy-Con and the Amiibo and the other sort of elements around Zelda Skyward Sword to help celebrate the game again, it just feels dated. It just feels dated. It's really good. It's not going to be the 10 out of 10 escapism that I felt like the game was back in 2011, and that's all progress, and that's all related to what Nintendo has done with its own reinvention of its franchise. It's still damn good, though, and I think it's absolutely worth checking out. I may, if you haven't got Breath of the Wild, get that first, for sure, and I would also put Link's Awakening above this game. I know that might be a little bit weird, because I think people really like the 3D mainline stuff, but this is absolutely worth checking out. So make your own pecking order for how you appreciate your Zelda games. What I've played so far of Skyward Sword HD, I would give an 8 out of 10 to.